Okay, cool. So let's get if this is your first time joining us for a Startup Grind event, I know it's definitely everyone's first time at a Startup Grind virtual event. We have a tradition where we give a standing ovation to our speakers who are joining us. So today, our speaker is Baird Hall. He is a retired Startup Grind volunteer himself. But more importantly, he is joining us today to share his journey as an entrepreneur, which started kind of at Startup Grind. So I won't steal his thunder or dive into the story because that's what he's going to be sharing with us today. But if you all in the chat will give your applause as best you can, and I'll play our recording. We will pretend that Baird is walking up to the stage and sitting down with me and not just staring at his computer
Golf clap.
screen.
That's a good one.
Baird, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope you guys can hear that.
It's also tradition for me to have an IPA and pizza at Startup Grind. That's pretty much why I started, because I was interested in entrepreneurship and loved happy hour. So
Yeah.
keeping that tradition going.
Yeah. So I'll do a better job remembering my my libations next time. I had a lot kind of on my mind going into this event. So I don't want to embarrass myself too much, but absolutely the next in-person event I will do that. So Baird, to kind of start us off here, what is, and I know I asked you this whenever we were preparing for today's event, but have you had any time to think about or reflect on going from Startup Grind volunteer to speaker? Like, how are you feeling bringing your experience full circle today?
Yeah, it feels like forever ago, even though it was 2015, I think. I was working at Omatic Software for Jeff Montgomery, who's on the attendee list. And when I started getting the entrepreneurial bug, Startup Grind was the first thing I did. It's like the first thing I did was found the local chapter, and it just started up. Jeremy had started it, and I just went to an event, and because I didn't really know what else to do, and it's definitely is early on in my journey was one of the first steps I took, and then quickly became a volunteer and just did that until last year. So yeah, it feels cool, and also just seeing all the familiar names in the chat of people that we've seen at all these events. It really is a community, and connect with these people all the time. Everybody's so helpful in Charleston. That's really been one of the best and most inspiring parts of my journey for sure, is that how willing people are in the community to help out.
Yeah, I agree. The community is so great. That's why I'm here too. I jumped in and then I liked what I experienced. The people were great, and so here we are today. Just two of us Startup Grind people, you know, jumping in. But can you just for a brief moment take us back a little bit farther than 2015? I know you're originally from Shelbyville, Kentucky. How did you end up in Charleston? What was it that brought you here to us?
I graduated in 2010, and my sister was working at Blackbaud. She had moved down, and it was really random how she got that job 2 years before I graduated. And she was living in an apartment in Mount Pleasant and got a job at Blackbaud. And then when I graduated, I was a communications major, career 2.5 GPA, just enough to get by. Had no, I was a baseball player. I focused most of my time on sports through high school and college. So I had no clue what I wanted to do. And she invited me to come down and stay with her for a couple of weeks. And I interviewed at Blackbaud. I applied for graduate school at Citadel and College of Charleston and did not get in. And but the Blackbaud offered me a job doing Razor's Edge customer support. And so I moved down here and got that job within 2 weeks, and even met my wife within the first 2 weeks. I didn't know at the time, but met her first day on the job. And it's crazy that decision to move down here just set so many things in motion with my life, and been here since. Now it's been 10 years.
Yeah. Well, glad that it stuck. I think a lot of people can relate to coming to this kind of fork in the road of continuing education. Not everyone, but I think a fair amount of people, or continuing on that professional journey. So what was were you at Blackbaud for a long time? What was kind of that experience being your first kind of gig outside of college?
I realized I liked working a lot better than school, so I'm glad that happened. But that job was tough. That was you took 30 to 40 phone calls a day from people trying to use this really complex CRM, and they've been on hold when we. So I got hired in 2010, and we were the first batch in support hired after the financial crisis freeze. So they've been on a hiring freeze for 2.5 years. In our first week out on the floor, as you would say, taking live support calls, you could see how long people were on hold. And we were answering calls where people were on hold for 40 minutes, 40 plus minutes. And it was such a crash course in talking to customers, talking to upset customers, how to diffuse situations. And there's not, I mean, there is a playbook for it, but you just kind of get tossed in. But so it was a tough job from that respect. That it was just every day you're talking to customers and never really know what you're going to get from a support standpoint. It got better as we kind of new people were hired on alongside of us. But it was great. There were so many things that I was surprised from a professional setting, that like going from college to work, like I don't know how to schedule a meeting or like, use G Suite or Outlook or whatever. So there were so many things to learn on the fly, and I loved it. The more I worked, the more I realized I just enjoyed trying to figure things out and not having to take tests. That was really the best part about it.
I appreciate that sentiment. Just, I don't know. I was okay in school, but the test taking was definitely not my favorite. I think a lot of folks would probably echo that as well. So being that Blackbaud was kind of your first real professional experience, what came after that, I guess? So obviously you didn't stay there forever. What was the next step on your journey, if you'll walk us through it?
Yeah, I was there for 1.5 years, and even after a year, I knew customer support was not what I wanted to do long term. That was pretty easy to see. So I started looking for jobs in professional services to be a consultant or thinking about sales. And I lucked out because Blackbaud would do these user groups all across the country, and they would go to random cities like DC or I think we went to Detroit one time, Vancouver, and they would send a salesperson and a consultant. And they would go invite everybody from the city that uses Blackbaud to come, and they would kind of do some training, and the salesperson was there to build relationships. And professional service consultants hated doing this. And they finally smartened up and said, well, let's just send somebody from support. And I was dying to do anything to get off the phones. And so I was like, I jumped at that opportunity, and I started getting paired up with a salesperson, and I would go to these user groups, and I had no clue what I was doing, but it was such a great experience to just get in front of customers in real life, and realize that I got exposed to the sales side of it. But I really lucked out in getting paired up with Omatic Software, where Jeff and Pam were partners with Blackbaud, but had a much smaller company. And I did a user group one time and met them and presented and kind of did my thing and met them. And it wasn't, I think it was like 4 months later, I was working for Omatic as a salesperson, as a sales engineer. So I lucked into that, and that was felt like a risk at the time because they were a small company. I think I was the 10th or 11th employee, somewhere around there. And that was like when I got hooked on small companies and realized that I don't want to do corporate stuff anymore. Like working with a small team is so much more fun. So I'm really glad I did that. And I was there for 5 years at Omatic. So that was the next big chapter.
For sure. And I'm going to pause you just for a second in the story. I'm not sure if your AirPods are dying or if there's some sort of...
Is it cutting in and out?
A little bit. It sounds more staticky than cutting in and out. If you want to check really quickly, just to make sure like everyone else can hear too.
Yeah, somebody in the chat confirm if they're cracking out there as well.
Okay.
Batteries look good. I can try it without them too.
Yeah, why don't we test it just for a moment without them, just to see what happens? Not to cramp your style. Tell me something.
How did...
I like that better. Let's see. Let me hop in the chat. try your computer mic. The consensus is we like this more better.
Nice, good. Well, I'm glad we made that change.
Okay. Same. I don't know if it was just me. I was like, there's a very real chance it could just be my technology, but it looks like we are good to keep this conversation going now that we can hear you properly. So let's go back. You're at Omatic. This is your second gig after school, and it's a small company. Tell us a little bit more about Omatic and being in the midst of an early stage startup and kind of what you were doing there. Did you have just one role like you did with your customer support role at Blackbot, or what was your experience? What were you learning at Omatic?
I got hired to be a solutions engineer. So I was the person that was paired with, similar to what I did at these user groups. I was paired with a salesperson, and the salesperson would handle the relationship and the sales process. And my job was to understand the product and do the demos and help with the technical evaluations and help basically be the product expert for the salesperson to hopefully close the deal. And there were so many great things about that I didn't know at the time. I was learning how to present and how to talk to people, and then being paired with a salesperson, I was learning all about the sales process, kind of soaking that in, even though that wasn't my specific role. And then just the nature of being, I think, if you're interested in being an entrepreneur, going to work for an early stage company is one of the best crash courses. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't even think, I never thought I had no entrepreneurial ideas at that time. But looking back, like, it really was, it was a small team and creating new products, going to get new customers, trying to keep those customers happy, and doing this iteration cycle over and over and over again. It was a really great experience. And I was there for 5 years, and it grew to 50 people. That's when I left. And my role changed a lot through that time. That's the great thing about being at a small company too. Looking back on my experience, I've never been great at anything. I'm like good at a lot of different things. It's very much a generalist. And that worked so well to a small growing company because they would, every couple months they would be like, we need somebody to, I remember my first big project was building out a e-learning library, like self-paced learning. And that was my job for 4 or 5 months because nobody else knew how to do it. And I was like, I'll figure it out. I'll try. And I probably didn't do a great job at it, but it's funny that stuff like that today, like we create e-learning libraries. We do knowledge bases and stuff for our products now. So it was a great experience as a generalist to be able to just bounce around and do a lot of different things. I would help marketing. I would help sales. I would do the demos and take on all types of different projects. So it was, as a young person, it didn't feel like a risk, I guess, but it was a small company, but they were doing really well. So it didn't feel like a risk, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds like Omatic was a great experience for you just all around, and what you learned and the people that you were working with and the takeaways. And I know you said that, initially within the 5 years that you were there, you didn't have any entrepreneurial itch, no ideas for anything, but that changed at the end of 5 years. So tell us a little bit about that first attempt at building a company, and who were you working with? What was the project? Walk us through that a little bit.
So yeah, I'd been at Omatic for 5 years, and I had just gotten married. It was January of 2015, and I'd always, for the last year before that, I just had this gut feeling that I wanted to do something on my own eventually. I didn't know what. And Omatic was growing. It got up to, we had a big sales team, and we're getting up to 50 people. And we actually had different departments, so you weren't bouncing around as much as you were. So I think I was missing that, I guess, excitement of not knowing what was coming next. So the original idea that I had, so when I worked at Omatic, I would take my lunch break and I would listen to ESPN radio all the time. I'm a big sports fan, and that was like my break during the day. And I always got frustrated that you couldn't talk back to the show without dialing in, and you also couldn't talk to other listeners. I felt like, wouldn't it be cool if we could form almost simulate people arguing at a bar about sports around a sports radio show? And so the first idea was called You Talk Sports, and it was a mobile app where you could create rooms for podcasts and radio shows and talk with other listeners. And, it was almost like a virtual. I like Jeff's comment here. He still thinks the idea can fly. He was one of the first people I ever told about this. And so it was basically what we were trying to build was like community channels based on audio. And I love the idea. And I had got connected to my wife's best friend, her husband. His name's Nick Fogel, who's been my co-founder through all this the last 5 years. He is technical, and he just passed the bar to be a lawyer and decided that he wanted to be a software developer. And so they were like, our wives were like, stop talking to us about these entrepreneurial ideas. And like, you all just go and get your energy out. So we would meet up at Starbucks every Sunday and talk about all of our different ideas, which was a great way to vet a co-founder, by the way. Like, there's a lot of pressure when you're finding a co-founder. And this was like just very casual. Every Sunday we would catch up, we would pass ideas, we would pass around products that we're interested in. And we just really started trusting each other and decided to try to start this company and build a mobile app that was all based on these audio messages. And the first mistake that we made was did not think about a business plan or how we were ever going to make money, which is important for everybody listening that hasn't tried this. So the long story is that we spent 2 years, all of my savings. And again, I just told my wife out of the blue that I wanted to be an entrepreneur and create a startup. And we had these grand visions of raising money and creating this big B2C consumer app that, as podcasting was growing and we thought this audio, and turns out we were pretty early. I still think we would be early if we tried it today. And it didn't work out. And 2 years went by. There were a lot of ups and downs. We would bring on an ESPN radio show and like have these huge highs and bring on a bunch of listeners. And we actually had a lot of big radio stations that used it and 10,000 plus active users. And then, they would be really excited about it for 4 or 5 weeks, and then everybody would drop off. We had no like consistent engagement. We tried all types of different revenue models. We tried ads, we tried subscriptions, premium features. We tried to sell this and license it to radio stations, which was such a nightmare because radio stations might as well like technologically be in like the 1980s or 90s. They getting them to do anything. That was another thing. We didn't identify our market or understand our customers. We literally screwed up everything that you could possibly mess up. But we had a lot of fun. And we had users that loved our product. People use it every day, and people were. We really learned audio and media processing, which we didn't know much about. So I could. That was such a special and frustrating time in my life. I could talk about it for a long time, but that was I guess that's kind of the quick version.
Yeah. Well, as you said, you guys tried a lot of stuff. You made a lot of mistakes. You didn't necessarily fail fast, but you learned a lot. So with that, what if you had to pick or point out one reason why You Talk, which was your first company that you tried to build after leaving corporate world, if you had to list one thing about why it failed, what would that be to you?
It wasn't for hard work, that's for sure, or focus or determination. It was, I would say, it was just a lack of planning and testing on the business model side. All we thought about was product, and this also some context. Back in 2015, like Instagram was Instagram was definitely a thing, but social media apps were still popping up. Like Snapchat, I don't think it happened yet. Like the whole internet and people that were creating things on the internet, all they were thinking about were these big B2C app plays. So we definitely, I would say, we were following what Silicon Valley was putting out as far as like, here's how you build a startup and here's how you do it. You have to, shoot for the moon and build a consumer product. we were definitely listening. I'd say the number one thing we did wrong is we were listening to other people. We were not listening to ourselves. We were just scraping and clawing at whatever advice we could get, and trying to follow that, and not thinking like, wait, are we trying to build a business here or a product, and going from there.
Gotcha. So my follow-up to that is, I mean, you and Nick, y'all spent 2 years working on You Talk, and you put a lot of time and energy and attention into it. And this is probably not the easiest question, but I'm going to ask it. What was the worst part or the hardest part about realizing like You Talk was a fail?
The hardest part was, I mean, I put $30K in savings in it that I'd saved up over the last 5 years. That was hard, but the hardest part was Nick he went to law school and decided, I convinced him he wanted to be a software engineer and was, working on that on the side. And I convinced him to do this with me. And he had a student loan from law school. And most people probably know, like, in the range of what that would be. And I talked him into doing this very risky startup. That was when we realized that it wasn't going to work. That was the toughest thing to realize, like how much time we had spent on it, all the risk that we took, the savings we put in, all the time that Nick was missing out, where he would have been working a good job and, paying back on his student loans. He was freelancing and doing other things. But I would say it's that lost opportunity. The opportunity opportunity cost that was the toughest part. Is just, I wish we had shut it down earlier. I think would have been the lesson there.
Gotcha. But you all, I mean, how did you make out what was, I guess, the final part of officially like closing down You Talk for you guys?
One more thing I would say on that might be helpful to people is that first business, I would say that my ego was tied up to it in a weird way. Idea, I had come up with this, and that didn't take feedback on it very well, and it's probably why it didn't morph into whatever it needed to, because I just kept pushing what I thought this needed to be. And then I didn't want to shut it down because it would look like I was the failure because I was so tied to this business. So that was a big problem too. That was a reason that it went on too long. But we finally made the decision. That was Christmas 2016. And I had a couple of drinks at my dad's house, I remember, on Christmas. And I listed it on flippa.com, which is an exchange where you sell websites. Mm-hmm. And it didn't sell. Nobody bid on it. But then 2 days later, somebody saw the the unsold post and put an offer in. And they bought the source code, and we sold it for $27,000 after 2 years. And that was a big loss. Mm-hmm. But we actually sold what we built, which was nice. And then had a services contract to move it over to this company's environment and stand it up. They did live streaming, and they wanted to add audio component to their product. So it was at least we didn't get nothing for it, I guess.
Right. I mean, we can just hope for the best, I think, at this point in the journey. And thank you, for sharing that insight and just being like super authentic about it. I don't think anyone likes to fail. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who's like, yeah, that's cool. But I don't know. I think I'm not looking at the chat, by the way, because I closed it. But like I said, just thank you for sharing that and being honest about it. In hindsight, I think it's fair to say that You Talk failing, as much as it sucked, was probably one of the best things that could have happened overall, because, and I want to zoom out just a little bit because I know we got down into that story a bit, but you have 4 other successful companies that you're running right now. And just for the sake of keeping track of them, do you mind just like telling us the name of each company in order of launch, and just very briefly, what is the problem that each of them solves?
Yeah. So we've been busy since we shut that down in late 2016, and we launched Wavve in 2017. So Wavve is our biggest company that's been around the longest, and that is a audio sharing tool for social media. We help podcasters take little clips of their audio and transform that audio into social media videos. And that idea came from this mobile app that we built. We can talk about that more. So that's one company. And then the next one is Subtitle. We started that one in 2018. That's a video editing and captioning tool. That was something else we did with Wavve was we needed to add transcripts and formatting to social media videos and realized all video creators on the web need to do this. So we spun that out as a separate company in 2018. And then this year, I guess thanks to COVID, because we're just in the house so much, we created 2 new companies. One's called Duplicate. It's a content repurposing tool. We turn audio to video or video into audio or video and audio into blogs. It's for people that want to take a piece of content and turn it into multiple different things. And then the most recent is Churnkey, which is something we built internally for all these companies that helps SaaS companies retain more customers by building easy offboarding cancellation flows. So when somebody's canceling, you can hit them with offers, discounts, pauses, instead of actually canceling the subscription. It's something every SaaS company has to do. And this is, in our opinion, the best way to do it.
Gotcha. Thanks for listing those out, because I knew I would not do them justice if I tried to do it. We're better to hear that than from you and yourself. And you and I talked about this a little bit in the prep, but a lot of your companies are so connected in that you see something in Wavve and you've built it out into a whole separate company, which is Subtitle.
Yep.
And then the same with Churnkey and issues that you had identified in your other companies. And while your companies seem to do one thing really well, which is, in my opinion, and you can certainly correct me, is serving creatives and giving them tools to do their thing. How do you approach and think about building sellable features versus building out a sustainable company?
So one thing that has been persistent through my whole journey has been focusing on helping people that have a message that they want to put on social media and helping them do that. That's why we built UTalk to begin with. We wanted to help sports fans that had something to say and needed a way to say it with others. And so we kind of took the expensive route to build a big mobile app for that. But really the idea behind all these companies, Wavve, Subtitle, and Duplicate, is we want to help content creators that have something important to say, help them get it on social media and make it more effective and make them more successful. So I think it was important, and this kind of goes back to my Startup Grind days. The first speaker at Startup Grind was Matthew Goff, and he's still in town. And I met up with him for a beer, and I remember him saying, like, I was asking him all kinds of questions as I was just kind of young, naive, wannabe entrepreneur. And he was like, dude, you just need to take a breather and figure out what it is you want to do. Not what product or what idea you want to work on, but like, what is the core thing that you want to focus on over your next 10 to 15 years? And that was really important for me, and it's stuck through really for the first 3 companies. So I would say when you have that mindset of like, okay, instead of, this is the big shift that we made, right? So with UTalk, we were like, okay, we have this great idea. We're going to build it and it's going to be amazing and it's going to blow up. And that didn't work. So the new way for us to think was, okay, well, we have this purpose in general. We don't exactly know what problems these people have yet, but we're going to find them and we're going to build solutions for those people. And so by focusing on creators and watching them, figuring out what they were struggling with, talking to them on social media, these problems start popping up and we can start building products that are similar and can be marketed to that whole group. So I would say that was like the big mind shift for us, going from, idea people to finding problems within a very specific niche market.
Awesome. And so when you say, we, as you were creating multiple companies, once you had your bearings with Wavve and you understood, product market fit and your customers, and you were open to their feedback, were you and Nick together launching Subtitle and Duplicate and Churnkey the same as you did with Wavve? So
no, because we were figuring this all out as we went. We did not have this grand plan in mind. So me and Nick created Wavve, and then when I wanted to create Subtitle, and we had decided like this needs to be its own company, he had just had a baby and was not in a place to take on any more risk. Wavve was really still, less than half to what it is today. So it was growing, but these niche bootstrap companies, they take 2 years at least to get up and going of slow linear growth. So we actually started Subtitle with 2 other partners that are separate. So the companies are integrated, but the products are integrated, but they're separate companies. And then Duplicate was kind of a combination of everybody on a new cap table for that company. And then Churnkey has a different member that's not included in the first 3. So it's really complicated. And a couple times we've tried to merge all these companies together into a umbrella company with subsidiaries below it. And it's never worked out, even though I wanted it to. But the more this goes on and I look back at those merges not happening, I think everybody being on their own product with a unique cap table has actually been really helpful, because everybody knows their incentives. Everybody knows what they need to focus on, which companies are doing really well. If you're a part of that, you can, kind of take it easy. But if you're starting a new one, it's actually worked out pretty well that way so far. I wouldn't say it's out of the cards. We might bring them all together down the road, but that's just the kind of way that it's happened so far.
Gotcha. So although the companies aren't necessarily living under one umbrella, there are some common threads, namely you, independently, let me think about how to word this. Have any of your companies at this point had any acquisition conversations from larger entities?
Yeah, it happens with Wavve. Wavve's our largest company. It's doing like 1.6 annually recurring. So I would say every 6 months we kind of have some companies that come in and want to do some acquisitions, and we always take it seriously. We have gone through due diligence probably half a dozen times, and in his credit has done a great job of, we've got a huge spreadsheet that, we've kind of seen the valuations and multiples that some of these different groups have offered. And then our revenue projections over time, I'm trying to find a sweet spot of kind of when we would want to do that. And we are planning, we're serious enough about it to be able to talk about it in public, that we are planning to sell Wavve next year if we can find the right buyer. And there's some of that's happening right now. So that will be my first time, aside from selling Flippa for nothing, for pennies on a dollar. So that'll definitely be a new learning experience for us.
Yeah. So coming out of those conversations and knowing what you know now, and this doesn't have to apply just to Wavve, this could certainly apply to Duplicate or Churnkey or Subtitle, but have any of these conversations or do they at all shape your product strategy for any of your companies now?
Yeah, definitely. So we actually have taken what these different groups, figure out what they're looking for and reverse engineer to it and say, like, if we're going to build a company, we want it to fit within these certain parameters. And I should also say that the companies that we build are very specific in that we're shooting for, when we're evaluating a new product that we might build, we're shooting for, maybe like 50,000 annual recurring up to 2 million or 3 million. Anything beyond that, companies are usually, you're having employees and a lot of operations, we're not operators. We're definitely like the creative types, like to get it up and going and then hand it off to an operator. So we're looking in this very specific sweet spot. And the groups that look for these companies, they're looking for profitability and low maintenance. They don't want to see a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of manual work. They want to see a lot of automated processes. They want to see a lot of profitability, like between 50 to 70% gross margins, which is really important. So it needs to be pretty lean. And they want to see a very defined niche market. So that, something that can be kind of not so much owned, because there's always going to be competition, but they want to see very focused target market and, certain total addressable market within there. So we try to keep that in mind as we're building companies or making decisions on, how far we want and how hard we want to push them.
That's awesome. We didn't dive into that as much in our prep, but I'm
A
glad
lot
I
of
asked.
things new are fresh in our mind.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought up, some of the lessons around being able to show profitability and, and automation set up within your companies so that it's a little bit more turnkey, not turnkey for interested buyers. How else has your focus on numbers and goals changed over time since launching Wavve?
Focus on what? Sorry, I missed that.
How's your focus on numbers and goals changed over time? Like even before these conversations?
I would say, we have always, I would say with Wavve, when we started Wavve, we didn't have any money. We were broke. We were freelancing to pay our bills. And so there was no option to, dump 10 grand into Google AdWords or whatever, or hire some marketing agency to fire it up. We were just like, all right, we just sold this company and we have this tool from it that turns audio into video for social media. And we're like, let's just launch it as a little side gig and see what happens. And so with Wavve, we were always conditioned to having very linear, steady month-over-month growth. And it just kept growing little by little. There was no, the type of businesses that we build, you're never going to have, this is very different from like a venture-backed company, which is another great way to go, but they're just very different. We're never going to have like one customer that we're going to close that's going to change our company's direction. We're not going to like close a customer and then use those funds to hire people to then, compound on that and really start scaling and taking off. So I would say that we kind of lucked into that just because we didn't have any other options. But that's really become part of our ethos is the term that's kind of creeping up now. We didn't come up with this term, but is building calm companies, like companies that are very predictable. They don't big, huge amounts of lifts or sales teams or, human capital to get them going, but very calm and predictable companies. So we are always looking for, steady month-over-month linear growth consistently. So I would say that that's a big thing when we're looking at numbers. When we're building a new product, we want to be able to model out, a very steady and predictable revenue stream.
Got it. There was something that you touched on a few times just now, and it was about venture-backed companies and raising capital. And I would not be doing anyone justice if we didn't talk about this last topic as we get ready to go into Q&A, which is all of your companies, both Wavve, where you and Nick really got started and saw some success, and now with Subtitle and Duplicate and Churnkey, all of your businesses are bootstrapped. Can you, for anyone who is tuned in, who doesn't understand what that is, can you explain that to us and then share and dive in a little bit more about why you decided to bootstrap Wavve and your other companies?
Yeah, so the term bootstrap pretty much means that you're not taking or raising any capital. And for the most part, unless you just have a lot of money laying around, usually means that you're not putting your own capital into it as well. Obviously, every business takes a certain amount of money to get going with bank accounts and tools and whatever you may need. But bootstrap companies mean that you don't need to raise outside funds. Now, with outside funds, there's a lot of different types. There's angel investments, which are usually smaller, more independent. Then there's seed money, which come from kind of small firms. And then this is all hearsay. I've never actually raised money. And then there's venture capitalists, which are, they're the ones that we all hear about, right? When, Sequoia puts, 20 million into some product. Like that's what we hear on TechCrunch. And that's the stuff that enamored us early on. But we fell into bootstrapping because of that first failed product, and we were just kind of hacking around on this first one. But in hindsight, looking back, and I'll also say I have a lot of friends that run venture-backed companies, and there's nothing wrong with it. What's important for, I think, people that are getting started to know is that it's a very different company type and it's a very different lifestyle. So I think a good way to frame it is like if you're going to run a venture-backed company, you've got to be a fast thinker. You've got to be able to sit in a boardroom, talk to people, come up with answers quick. You generally need to be, quick-witted and be able to come up with solutions on the fly. Things are moving extremely fast in venture-backed businesses. With bootstrap businesses, they are very slow. Nothing happens in an instant. There's no big inflection point that changes your life. You're really spending a lot of time researching these different, very niche areas where you want to build tools. So those are kind of the two different ways to go. You can also have a kind of a blend in the middle. There's a lot of people now that I'm really interested, especially in some of our new companies like Churnkey are going forward, where some people will raise money, but they'll just do it once, as opposed to venture capital, which is usually, you raise a seed round, you raise a round, and then they keep going and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. And there's pros and cons to both. The big pro to venture capital is if you can do it and make it work, it's a lot of money, as opposed to, a bootstrap company. It's going to be a much lower target over a longer period of time. So those are kind of the two differences, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. Although I will say that, the type of business that you're going to start, you need to know before you start that business. You need to model out what it's going to take to get that thing off the ground, because some businesses like UTalk, for example, that we keep going back to, UTalk needed venture capital. Like, for that to work, we needed to raise $3 million, build this crazy app, do a huge PR blitz. Like, you can't bootstrap that type of business. So it's important to know, if you have an idea that you're cooking on, try to plan out okay, here's what I think is going to be needed to get this off the ground. What type of investment can I bootstrap? If not, can I raise money? And if I need to raise money, is that the type of company I want to run? So anyway, that's kind of a long rambling answer, because there's no perfect answer to what you should do. But that's kind of how we think about it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And not to impose too much of my own experiences into this, because it's not about me, but working at the harbor and just being a part of this community, there's no one size fits all, it seems, for any business. And sometimes you have to learn the hard way. And sometimes when you have, startup grinds and Baird halls in the world, sharing this knowledge, it just gives you something to chew on. But I just to close this out, and this will be my last question, and then I'll invite the startup grind team to hop on here and ask any questions that are in the Q&A. But my final question for you is, being that you've bootstrapped all of your companies, what are some, and I think a lot of people, well, I don't want to generalize too much, but I think whenever we hear about startup companies, we tend to think, well, they must be raising money. I didn't used to hear about bootstrapping as much, and people sometimes will mistake the idea that capital is the most valuable, truly the most valuable resource that a company can have. But I've learned over time that that's not true for everyone, as you just said. So in your mind, what are some other equally valuable resources or tools or opportunities that someone who's bootstrapping a company should look out for or be aware of that they might not know right now, if they're that early?
Well, I think the most valuable thing in any company is going to be the team, whether you're raising or going the bootstrap route. And for us, the team is so important, because we don't raise money to hire outsourced, for example, building a product. Somebody needs to do it, and we don't raise money to outsource it. So making sure we find the right people that have the same mindset and are willing to bootstrap long-term, focus, be consistent over time, is really the most important. And the great thing about the bootstrap businesses, it's definitely a new trend that's happening and getting more popular. There's a lot of sites like Indie Hackers, and MicroConf is another one that's really, really popular. And there's even some investment firms out there like Earnest Capital and Tiny Seed and Tiny Capital that they're actually funding bootstrappers in a new way and doing more profit sharing over time, as opposed to raising money and taking equity. Can you all hear my child screaming in the background?
Yeah, love that. I love that song. I thought we were just hearing music from the bar next door or something.
It is.
Trying to get
yeah, plans change today, so things. That's 2020 though. We're just kind of dealing with it.
You know, it certainly is. Not that I have any children myself running around here, but it's just part of the journey, my friend. So, well, Baird, thank you so much. I want to make sure that we dedicate some time in these last 15 minutes for Q&A. So to the Startup Grind volunteer team, if you want to hop on the screen here, I am going to also record the Q&A piece for our video, just because I think the audience will probably have some better questions than maybe what I had, and we might dive in a little bit more. So Joseph, Steve, Emily, Jeremy, Andrew, if y'all want to hop back on presenter mode, let's jump into the Q&A here, and I might be able to bring you all back on myself. Hi, Joseph. Hi, Steve. And make sure you're not on mute, which it looks like you gentlemen.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for that really informative chat. That was excellent. I think we've got a couple of good questions in the chat. So I don't know, do you want to go through those, Alex, or do you want me to ask one right off the rip here?
Yeah, if you want to start us off, Steve, with one of the, it can be from the chat Q&A, but for the Q&A part, I'm going to let the rest of the team chime in. So let me introduce you guys really quickly. So to everyone out there, this is the new Startup Grind volunteer team. We have Joseph, who is our head of marketing, Emily, who is our head of attendee experience, and Steve, who is the head of community and partnerships. So they're going to help me out here so I can stop talking. And Baird, of course, will be doing the answering. So Steve, if you want to start us off, feel free. And Jeremy and Andrew, if y'all want to hop in too, you're more than welcome. But I know I didn't prepare you guys for this, so you don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. So to be clear, just go ahead and read off some of the questions in the Q&A, or come up with my own.
No, the Q&A is fine, because I was trying to, I'm sure some of the attendees were asking stuff, so I'm not going to put you on the spot that much.
Sure, yeah, there's a couple there right now. Jonathan Myers asks, any insight or suggestions on the best way to put together a pricing structure for SaaS products?
Yeah, for SaaS products. So for pricing is one of the hardest things that you're going to do when you're building a subscription-based software. And you have to do it early, because when you're making your first sale, you got to have some type of price identified. So one of the best things that you can do is figure out what your value metric is going to be. That's one thing that you can point to, that when a user is using your product, what is the one thing that they can point to that is delivering them value as they use the product? So for example, with Subtitle, our value metric is how many videos you create over time. We used to price it based on captioning and how many minutes of captioning. It was like kind of a per use, but we found out that people were really getting the value out of every video they downloaded. So that became our value metric. So I think that's the first thing to set. Another important thing is to just research competitors. They all have, if you have a competitor that's up and running, or even somebody that's like kind of quasi in your space, look at their pricing and copy it. It's a great place to start, because you know that if there's closing customers, it might work. That's a good way to do it. And then the third thing is, sometimes you just pick a number and go. Like, you can spend the rest of your life trying to find the perfect price point for your product. We probably haven't found it for ours. We're probably pricing it too low, I think, is kind of the latest thing that we've thought about. And things change over time. Like with COVID, we've had so many more people building podcasting tools. The value probably has gone up a little bit. So sometimes you just have to, pick something in the range that you feel like is right, and then test it and optimize it. That's the other thing that most people in SaaS don't do enough, is testing pricing. It's no fun. Changing your pricing is a big thing, and you have to talk to customers and communicate with them. So it's sometimes just picking a number and going is a good way to do it.
Cool. Thanks, Baird. Yeah, Emily or Joseph, you want to take one?
So the other question I saw, was Jeffrey your original founder? Was he the one that you worked with originally?
No, Jeff was my boss at Omatic that I worked for 5 years.
So he asked, what was it like convincing your co-founder to take another risk with you?
Oh, that's a good question. What's funny is that Jeff Omatic was a bootstrap company that I worked for 5 years. And it took me a year, and it took me 2 years of trying entrepreneurship to realize I wanted to build companies like that. So I really could have sped up a lot of time trying to copy what he did. But convincing my co-founder to take another risk, it was easier after the first company finally got up and going. Once Wavve was actually, paying us and supporting a salary for us, it was a lot easier. Nick is definitely much more of a risk manager. I would say he's a lawyer. Like, he can see risk a lot better than me, where I'm a sales guy. I'm like, no, it'll work out. This is fine. Let's just do it. So it takes me some time usually to pitch a new opportunity for him and kind of hammer away on it and let him, we kind of have a good balance of like, I'm trying to sell it. Like, here's how we're going to sell it. And he kind of tries to chip away at it, and we try to find a nice balance. So it takes some time to get there, but risk is tough. It's, everybody's at different points in their life when you're going to start a company, and there's always risk in a new venture. So it's something that there's got to be a return. That's really what you got to sell that vision.
Joe, did you have a question that you pulled out of the chat?
I did not have a question that I pulled out of the chat. I had an emergency hit while I'm sitting at my desk at work, so I hope everybody can relate to that. I guess the next question up is from Audra. How did you guys divide focus and roles in the beginning?
Well, with just 2 people starting out, it was easy. It was you do anything technical when it comes to building the product, and I'm going to do everything when it comes to building the landing page, getting customers involved, doing support. And then what worked really well for us is we would meet up once every couple of days and kind of report on what we have done. And then we would go, figure out, okay, here's what we're going to do next, and then break out and go do those things and then come back. It's best when that early team is able to quickly prioritize and make decisions on what you need to work on next. This is also a big point that I want to bring up is the big thing that I've learned over the last few years is entrepreneurship. It's just decision making. Like, when you run a business early on, yeah, sure, we're building websites and we're sometimes writing code or whatever, but what you're doing is making decisions. And early on, you're making quick decisions with long period, or you're making a decision every long period in between the next one. But as the company grows, you're doing less work and you're just making more and more decisions. So like, becoming a good decision maker is really important. And prioritizing is really key as well. It's like, what is the next thing that we have to do to get more customers in the door? That's really the question we ask ourselves over and over again. Not how do we make our product beautiful, or like, how do we build a great culture? It's like, early on with the bootstrap company, it's just like, what do we have to do to get sales so we can have money to be profitable, and then do those things down the road.
With to expand on the question though, with each of your companies, what was different about that kind of breakover metric where it's like, we have to hire somebody, or where did it go from just the 2 of you dividing the labor to sort of that bigger decision? Where was that time when you realized, okay, there's more that needs to be brought into the mix here?
It never felt like big inflection points. It was very gradual. It was, I would say every 5,000 in recurring revenue is when, like, 5, 10, 15, 20 early on. It's like, those are kind of important milestones. And those are when you actually have a little bit of extra cash to bring on contractors. That's definitely the toughest part of entrepreneurship, is looking at what needs to be done and figuring out what resources you have and how you're going to hit these next checkpoints. And there were a lot of times where we were like, oh God, we need to redesign this product, but gosh, our engineering bill is too high. And like, on one hand, you have unhappy customers. On the other hand, you've got engineering bills that are hurting your profitability. And like, that's a tough decision right there that you have to figure out. We only have one engineer. What are we going to work on? A lot of times we'd be like, oh, let's just fix this engineering because we'll be more profitable, and then we'll have more to roll into design. So I would say that just happens gradually, and over time, there's no there's no magic number where it changes. It's just kind of constant iteration and adding things over time as they come. I wish there was a better playbook for that. That would be nice.
I think a lot of people do, but thank you for the answer. That was very good.
All right, Baird, we've got a question from Andrew here. He's posted a few. His first is, you've gotten really good at using sales to get traction on new products. What are some mistakes you made early on that guide how you do sales now?
This is one of my favorite things about entrepreneurship is selling something that's new. It's a lot. It's hard because, but that's what makes it really fun. I did sales at Nomadic is where I learned a lot of those skills. And I would say that the second part of that question was like some of the things that we did wrong. Well, I would say that we targeting the wrong customer. That's one of the biggest mistakes you can make is not doing your research on who's actually going to use your product. I know, for example, early on when we created Wavve, we were still trying to sell this audio marketing tool to radio stations. Still hadn't learned my lesson that radio stations were not the right target. Lost about 2 months on that, where I just wasn't doing the right job of researching on who would be a good fit for the product before I took the time to actually go and do the outreach. The other thing that I really struggled with early on was being weighed, and think of the LinkedIn emails you get these big emails that are like, hey, here's what I do, here's my company, here's the price and all these things. I would write these big long emails and send them out. Nobody wants to get those crappy spammy sales emails. So over time I had to learn to shorten those and just send out very short messages and try to start building relationships and conversations with people as opposed to trying to sell people on the spot. I'd say those are the two biggest mistakes that I made early on that I had to figure out.
Cool, thank you.
The next question is from Zach. He said, being bootstrapped, how did you deal with burn rate / runaway pre-MVP?
For all of our businesses, for Wavve, Subtitle, and Duplicate, we all put in $1,000. So Wavve was $2,000, and that's it. That's all we did. And we use that. Well, sorry, for Wavve, we didn't have any more money. That's what we had, and so we put in $2,000 and went from there. But we did the same thing for Subtitle, but that was 3 partners. And we prefer to set an amount of money that we want to put in. That money is to get our first 10 to 15 customers, and that money needs exactly perfectly because we don't put much in there, and we do that on constraint. Really, in our opinion, breeds creativity, and we're doing that with Churnkey. We're putting a little more money in now because we have it, and we're going to be going B2B to bigger customers. But we all put in a certain amount of money, and that's what we have to get going. So I think that identifying the amount of money as a bootstrapper that you're willing to put into a product to get it going sets the constraints to make you get creative, but it also forces a decision point to say, like, wait a second, we said we were only going to do this. If we're going to put more money in, there needs to be a good business case for it. So that's the way we've done it, and it's been helpful, I guess. Maybe for some of these companies, I could have got them off the ground faster if we put more money in and took more risk, but I don't know. I think we're getting better at that as we go, but we were just so risk averse early on.
Making sure I'm not on mute. Steve, I think we have time for one last question. If you want to squeeze in Andrew's final question,
yeah,
and
sure.
I'll close this out with our announcements.
Yep.
And goodbyes.
Andrew's second question, Baird, is you mentioned prioritization. How do you set boundaries and prioritize what to work on day to day? Somebody clicked that it was answered live, and I didn't. Hold on.
Yeah, that was good. I read it.
Let me quickly just read it, just in case the recording doesn't have this. You mentioned prioritization. How do you set boundaries and prioritize day to day now that you're juggling 4 companies?
It's a great question. And we have this. For the last question, I could talk for an hour about this. We created this framework. We call it the Moneyball framework. If you've ever read the book or seen the movie Moneyball, it's about this baseball team that set all these very specific KPIs that they thought they could optimize for winning. And they would find the cheapest baseball players that could hit these little specific weird KPIs that they knew would hopefully turn into winning. It's a really great book. Even if you don't like sports, if you like business and analytics, it is my favorite book of all time. And that is kind of the framework that we use. Is we create a plan that says, okay, for this product to work, let's take Subtitle or Wavve's a good example. For someone to convert to be a customer on Wavve, they have to upload an audio file, they have to upload an image, they have to set their design, and there's this product flow that they have to go through before they can become a customer. And so we'll set those KPIs, and then we'll figure out and prioritize, like, well, what do we need to do to make sure these steps get completed, and make sure that we're putting, and usually we need something in all 4 of those steps. So we're trying to look for what's the cheapest thing we can put in to get a quick win. Like, what's the cheapest way to get the most bang for our buck for this type of optimization. So like, that's at least how we look at it per product. Now, when we zoom out and look at it across multiple different products, it gets more complicated because different products have different revenue potentials. Like, I think right now Subtitle has the most growth potential, where Churnkey is just getting started, and we're very much in those like early stage of like getting it up and running. So that's where it's tricky, is like, well, $1 going into Churnkey versus $1 going into Subtitle is a lot different. And that's where it gets difficult. And that honestly is something that I'm still learning. With 4, I'll be honest, 4 might have been one too many. It's been a lot to manage lately. But that's kind of how we have to do it. And we have to evaluate, like, okay, we know which company can grow the fastest tomorrow. Now we know that some companies are going to take longer. So it's a balancing act and just trying to make the right decisions. But we found that just trying to speed up the decision-making process is probably the most helpful.
So what you're saying is you're selling a company, is what you're saying. That's what I took from all that. You're selling one of these off.
That'd be nice. If somebody on the chat wants to buy one, please email me.
Yeah, DM Baird and let him know if you want to buy one of his companies and put a bid in on the one you want.
The bid's got to be higher than 27,000. I take it.
Hopefully. Yeah. Oh gosh, hopefully.
Well, guys, we're at the end of our time here tonight, and I just want to take the next 60 seconds to first thank Baird. Thank you so much for being my first guest that I'm hosting, and the team here, Steve, Joseph, Emily. Thank you guys for your help and your hard work. I learned a lot, which I always do at Startup Grind, but Baird, I'm especially happy to have shared this journey tonight with you. So thanks for your patience and your help.
Thank you. I hope to see everybody at a Startup Grind event in 2022. That would be, or 2021, whatever it is. We're trying to get as far away from 2020 as possible, I think. So hopefully we see everybody next year.
Yeah. Well, I hope you all have a great holiday. And for the attendees, just thank you guys so much for being part of this community. We will have a January event. We'll post that here hopefully in the next week or 2. It'll be on the later half of January. So please keep your eye out for that. And Baird, of course, you're welcome to attend and get back into the audience instead of on the hot seat here. But, just thank you all so much. I had I don't have Zoom fatigue from this event and this experience. So none of that exists here, but I hope that everyone has a great holiday. If you have any lingering questions for Baird, check out our Facebook group page. We're always in there, or send us a message and we'll get back out to you guys. So bye Jordan, bye Dee. I'm gonna figure out how to stop this recording. Bye Steve, bye Joseph, Emily, bye Baird.
All right, bye.
And I'm gonna
Great job, Alex.